Hey, it's Marisol. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Really quick, I wanted to let you know that we have partnered with U.S. Bank on their mission to power human potential through their Community Possible grant program. This program is dedicated to supporting communities like this one while addressing racial and economic inequities. This could be a great opportunity for you, so click the link in this episode description, learn more, and apply.
Get it out. It ain't even mind the whole, man. Integrity. Pet that. All we got is our word.
Hello, this is Marisol Solarte-Erlacher, psychotherapist and consultant, and this is the Resilience and Resistance Podcast, a podcast about successful Black, Indigenous women of color who have overcome trauma and become resilient. Hi, Zaneta.
Hi, Mari.
How are you today?
You know what? I'm yet keeping on, as the old folks say.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. I so appreciate you being a guest on this podcast. If I think about the women that I want to have a conversation with, you are always at the top of my list.
Oh, wow.
And I know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I think about the women that I just absolutely adore. You're always at the top of mine.
Oh, I appreciate that.
For sure.
So, usually when I start this podcast, I start to reminisce about how I met every person. I have the privilege of knowing everyone that I interview very personally. And so I was thinking about how we met, and I think someone had recently asked me, how do you know Zaneta? And we met, I think it's been, probably 7 years ago.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, both of your youngest and my only son were in the same first grade classroom together.
That's right. Mm-hmm. And they're in 8th grade now. Yeah.
Yeah, they'll soon be in high school.
I know.
Mind-blowing. And I think the first time that we ever met, we went trick-or-treating.
I don't remember that being the case, but it does not sound unlike me. To be like, hey, I don't know you well. I kind of, now as you say that, I'm remembering that is true. Yep, right up here in the neighborhood. I do remember that.
Yeah. You're like, why don't we meet trick or treat? I was like, sure. Tell me where. I'll meet you.
That sounds very much like the person that I am, Mari.
Yeah.
I make friends very easily, and I mean, it's you, right? You're that wonderful, attractive spirit. So it's like, yeah, let me hang out with her and say it's for the kids.
Yeah, I feel like I feel very lucky that Santos was connected me with so many amazing people. So yeah, and I think that we've obviously, like, in our own way, have been on our own journeys together, and maybe in parallel in some ways.
Yeah.
So I think when I met you, I'm almost positive when I met you was when you were working at Arrow. Could that be true?
That could be true. I'm trying to remember if first grade. It might have been, or I might have been transitioning. So I started with Aero Electronics in 2015. Mm-hmm. And right before that, I was with a tech startup in the Denver area. So tech has been a part of my story for a really long time. So yeah. I was either at Aero or about to transition there for sure.
Yeah. Well, I would love for you to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about who you are. How you identify, anything that would be important for our audience to know.
Yeah, thanks. So one of the things that I was reminded of lately at a dinner party a couple of weeks ago by my realtor friend who is amazing. He and his husband invited Derek and I over for dinner. And there was another couple that I knew from right before I met you. Mm-hmm. And Ben was reminding me that I told him that I was at a meeting once with a company I was working for, which you can probably tell by who I said I worked for just recently. And he said that I was frustrated by the lack of representation of women and people of color around this business meeting table. And there were 6 other people. 5 of them were all white men, and one of them was a guy from India. And they were asked to go around the table and introduce ourselves. And it was after 3 other meetings that had just been the same. And I finally just was kind of frustrated by the whole lack of being acknowledged at the table. That, and I actually went last because that's how they started. They went to the person right ahead of me and said, "Well, you start, and we'll end with her." And I introduced myself as, "Hi, I'm Zaneta Kelsey from Wakanda." So that kind of is that's kind of how I identify, and I think I'll leave it at that. No. I was explaining to Ben and his husband, who are 2 white guys, what it means when I said to them that I was from Wakanda. So I was born in D.C. and grew up in the Washington, D.C. area in Prince George's County. And Prince George's County, what most people don't know, is the largest mass of wealth of the African American population in the United States. And so I grew up at a time when African Americans were I saw African Americans as upwardly mobile, as educated, as career having, and those who were change makers. And so when I say that I'm from Wakanda, I really liken having grown up now, especially having lived in several different places, from Seattle to Dallas to Colorado to Denver, that DC was kind of the DC area was kind of this mecca, and Prince George's County was the capital where African Americans were were seen as very successful and still are today. So I grew up raised by 2 parents who had been married for 4 years, both from the South. And my mom from Virginia, my dad from North Carolina, and both of them had careers. Excuse me, and they both wanted to have children, and they tried for a really long time, for about 4.5 years. And that's a long time when you're trying. And they had my brother first. He's 11 months and some change older than me, so you can see that there was no stopping love. And then they had myself, and then my younger brother came 4.5 years later. So they took a break after me. They were like, "Ooh, okay." we got our boy and our girl, and we're happy with that. And now we're gonna wait. So my experience growing up was one of a lot of love, especially in the unit that we had together. My parents were people of faith and instilled Christian principles in me and my brother, and just wanted us to love other people and do what was right. I did really well in school, and I strove to be a leader, and I had a very special relationship with my dad. I liken my dad to the good Bill Cosby. So let's say the Heathcliff Huxtable reference, one on the TV show that everybody loved. He was really funny. He was really smart. He was really engaging, very kind. And he was kind of like a magnet. You just had this magnetism. You were just drawn to him. And I got the privilege of people wanting to be around my father and engage with him, but I was his girl. And so that was really special for me. And then I was my mom's little pet. So I got to go on a lot of shopping trips and, be a little bit spoiled by her. And then I got the privilege of having an older brother who protected me a lot and played with me. But in the neighborhood, everyone knew I was Hoyt's little sister. So don't mess with her. And then
Yeah.
when my younger brother came along, he became my little pet. And so I kind of got the privilege of spoiling him. Now, what I did not have was grandparents who were actively involved in my life. So my dad's mother died in childbirth when he was just two in the country in North Carolina. And my dad's father then moved to the DC area and made some life choices that were not as positive, and eventually got shot and died from a gunshot wound. And so they both died before I was born. And then on my mom's side, her mother died of diabetes when my mother was in her 20s, so before I was born as well. And then my grandfather, I did have the privilege of meeting, but he died. I met him when he was in his 80s and on the cusp of Alzheimer's when I was very young. And he died when I was in fifth grade. Fifth or sixth grade. Now I'm like having a hard time remembering which grade, but and I didn't know him well, so I didn't actually even choose to go to his funeral. So things that were missed were kind of that expanded family dynamic. However, my mother was child number 17 of 19.
Wow.
And half of her siblings and their families were in the DC area. And then my dad's family, a lot of them also migrated from the South to the DC area. And so we did have extended family. So holidays and weekends were definitely filled with activity from our extended family, church, and all the myriad of things that my mom and dad had me involved in, from ballet, tap dance, cheerleading, basketball, track, you name it. I probably tried it once. So I hope that paints a pretty good picture of kind of how I grew up. And then I got my degree after a struggle in college to figure out what I wanted to do. I knew that my dad was one of the first database engineers at the National Institutes of Health, one of the first African American database engineers. He introduced me to tech very, very early. Purchased my first laptop for me, desktop for me, my Apple II GS. And my dot matrix printer, and I became like super popular on the block because I could make those dot matrix banners that everybody used
Yeah,
to have.
girl,
So
yes.
listen, anytime anybody was having a party, I was like, "Oh, let me do your banner for you."
Let me spend about 3 hours waiting for it to.
The print, right? Exactly. And my dad is like, "Do I have to buy more paper now?" And so that was, Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego was my favorite game. So I just absolutely loved having a computer at home at such a young age. I think I was probably in fifth grade when that happened. And prior to that, my dad would bring home his modem and terminal, and I would play on that. The thing that had the cuffs, and you would put the the phone
Oh,
into it.
yeah.
We would do
Yeah.
that. And he would tell me his password, and I felt so secret and special. And my brother did too. We're like, "Ooh, we know the government passwords. We're spies." So when I got to college, I knew that I wanted to study something technical. In my 10th grade geometry class. And so I talked to my advisors, my counselors, and I did a couple of summer programs at the University of Maryland in my junior and senior year of summer, and decided to go into initially biomedical engineering. People were like, "How did you even know to think about that?" You know what? It wasn't until just like 5 or 6 years ago that I realized the connection between two things. So, my father, when he was when he was 8, so he was after his mother died, his father left for the DC area from North Carolina. He was raised by his paternal grandparents, and He was shot in the arm with a shotgun when he was in eighth grade and almost died, and by a family member at that who was drunk.
Oh,
And
wow.
so he lost a lot of the ability of his right hand and arm. And so it kind of, his arm and hand looked like it never grew beyond kind of his 13-year-old body. Even though he was kind of a taller, like he was 6'1" and kind of, built man. And so anyway, when we were watching a video in 10th grade in high school and I learned about prosthetics, I was like, oh my God, I want to do that. I had no idea.
Oh,
No
wow.
idea. I didn't even make the connection then that that was something that I wanted to do because of
Yeah.
him. And so I just decided I wanted to help people with prosthetics. And so here I go to University of Maryland. I applied to several other engineering schools and got in, but University of Maryland was a top ranked program at the time. And my dad told me he would buy me a car if I went to Maryland because he wouldn't have to pay out of state. So, cha-ching, I'll take the car. Me and my little Toyota Tercel. And so I went to Maryland and failed out of my freshman year pretty much. Like it was such a huge campus, which I was used to big things, but there was so much to be distracted
Yeah.
by the people, by the social things, by the clubs, by the groups, I worked as well because I wanted to, not because I had to. And I actually found a job at Walter Reed Army Medical Institute making $20 an hour as a freshman college student. That was nice money.
Wow.
I kept
Yeah.
upping my hours and not going to class. And so I get to my biology class and I just didn't love it. And I was like, if this is something I'm going to have to do for biomedical engineering for the rest of my career, not interested. So I went to my advisor and I said, well, what else can I do to help with prosthetics? And he said, well, you can go straight electrical engineering. And I was like, okay, great. I go to electrical engineering and all the guys in my lab class were all white except for a couple of Indian guys and just not welcoming, not warm, very just nasty,
Yeah.
very nasty. And I was like, if this is the environment I'm going to have to deal with for the rest of my life, I don't want to do that either. So I go back to my advisor. This is my sophomore year now. And I'm like, yeah, so that's not going to work. Is there anything else I can do to stay in engineering? And he was like, well, there's also computer engineering. And I was like, great, sign me up. He was like, all right, well, why don't you go ahead and try this discrete mathematics class? Oh my God. Like, really? I hated it. And then I hated my programming classes. And I was like, this is not my calling.
Yeah.
But I think I want to do this thing. And so I just had a real come to Jesus with myself about do I want to wrestle and struggle in something I don't love for the rest of my life to say that I did it? Or do I really want to find what I was purposed for?
Right.
And so I had to take some time. And so I took off 2 semesters from engineering and just did my core courses and I enjoyed those, but they didn't push me at all. So I found myself in this place of still trying to figure out what it was. And as I went to my core courses, somebody said, I think you should be in business. And I was like, really? Why do you think that? And they were like, well, you're great with people. You really love the idea of making money. And I believe that once you get focused and find that thing that you're going to do well, but not business for the sake of business. What about computer information systems in the business school? And I was like, oh, bet, let's try that.
Yeah.
And I go and I talk to my advisor and he was like, if we had talked about that a year ago, you could do that. But they only let in freshmen and sophomores. And at this point, you have enough credits and you're a junior. So that's not an option here. And it was this level of disappointment of what am I going to do now? And I'm going to disappoint my father, which was, I think, even worse for me than anything else. So he said, the advisor said, I know someone over at the honors college. And I was like, what does that mean for me? I don't have honors grades right now. And he was like, I can pull some strings for you. But he was like, this has to be it, Zaneta. This has to be it. Yeah. And I was like, you let me into that program and I promise you I will excel. And that's precisely what happened. I transferred over to University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and started taking my computer information systems courses. And I excelled to the point to where that before my last semester there, I was on the 5-year track, by the way, for college, which I was going to be anyway because I was an engineering student. So I hadn't lost anything. And they proposed me to IBM in my senior year. And IBM came to college and to the campus, and they met with me, and they loved me. I loved them. And they offered me a role to interview at 5 different locations across the U.S. And thus began my career journey into software and technology. And so I chose Seattle, Washington, one Washington to the other. I moved there right after graduation. The third week I was working for them, I was in a training in San Jose and then one in Stamford, Connecticut. And that's actually where I met Derek, my husband.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because he has computer engineering as well as he worked for IBM as well when he graduated. So that's where we met. It was not love at first sight, but eventually... It was eventually love.
Was it like Derek and Hot Pursuit for you, I imagine?
No, actually, it wasn't either. It was neither one of us really could stand each other. Well, I said I couldn't stand him. He says that I was wearing too much eye makeup. He says, I say he was very loud as a person. He was like the center of attention for everyone. And I just was like, yeah, I'm good on that. And he was like, I was very loud with my makeup and my colors. And being from Birmingham, he wasn't used to that, which I was like, okay. But anyway, he and I wound up connecting a couple of years later. Full circle. I moved back from Seattle after having been there for about 3 years to the DC area. And he sent an email out to several people from our cohort class that had been in Stamford, Connecticut, and said, hey, I'll be in the DC area. He didn't even know I was there. And so I responded like, hey, I'm here. And we connected, and we've now been married for almost 18 years.
Wow.
I know. We
That's
have
incredible.
our 2 boys, Andrew and Zachary, and 2 teenagers. I don't know how we got here. I don't feel old enough to even say that half the time. But yeah, we moved to Denver. We got married and moved to Dallas for my husband to go to Dallas Theological Seminary. He left corporate America to become a pastor, and so we moved to Denver, 11 years ago next month, to start a church, the Embassy Church. And and so here we are.
Wow. Zaneta, I'm so glad to hear that story. I don't think I've heard some of the details related to,
There's so many.
But just, I think that overview is so helpful just in terms of your path, because I think that, with such a specific, or with such a specialization in tech, I think there are lots of reasons why people choose that path, right? But I don't think it's always a direct path, especially in our generation, right? Like, it's not necessarily something that was, like, you had the privilege of having a father who was in that industry, and you had like kind of an intro very early on. But I think that the way that our journey is so circuitous in a lot of ways. So I appreciate that overview.
Had I not had that intro, I'm pretty sure I would have not known anything about tech.
Right. And I imagine for you too, I know obviously, like, there are lots of ways that we make decisions about where we're going to go on our journey. And you are a person that I know now is very focused in terms of, if you know that you want to go down a certain path, you're going to get down that path. And it doesn't surprise me that you decided, like, I want to work in prosthetics and this is the thing I'm going to do, and how am I going to get there?
Totally. Totally. Yeah. That I look back on that one, and I see it as kind of a foreshadowing of what was to come. It was something that I thought that I wanted. It was close to what I wanted, but not exactly. But I did figure out how to make the path, how to clear a path to get to where I wanted to go.
I'm curious about your transition from DC and, your family, extended family, that community that was so tight, to Seattle, Washington. What was that transition like for you?
That was hard. And it's interesting because while Prince George's County was a mecca of Black talent and wealth, it was a county that was slowly being segregated. As more African Americans moved from the South and migrated from the South to the North in the 60s, especially 50s, 60s, they moved to DC proper, the city of Washington, D.C. And as they began to get careers and develop well, they moved into Prince George's County. Well, Prince George's County was occupied by residents that were pretty much all white. And so you look at the demography of Prince George's County over, you can even look at it even close as 5-year periods from 70 to 75, 75 to 80, 80 to 85 and on. And you just see the slow darkening of the county. And so when I went to high school, my high school, Laurel High School, was the furthest north high school in the county. And so it touched on the next county that still to this day, I think, is still probably majority white. And so a lot of the white people who lived in Prince George's County kind of just migrated, in fact, especially lived around my high school, migrated to the next county. And so my high school, when I got there, and then my brother went the year before me, was majority white. And by the time I graduated, it was majority Black. And so I was used to engaging with white people. It wasn't a situation where I grew up in a Black bubble. I was and even the city within the county that I lived in, New Carrollton, did kind of that same transition. There were other counties that were closer to the DC line that had been primarily Black for a while, but I was definitely used to, in my extracurricular activities, when I took piano, the piano company that I learned from, Jordan Kitts, was a white company. Where I took ballet was white. Where I took most of my cheer, where I did cheerleading, all of that was white. Track wasn't, but we know why that was. So I was used to engaging with white people, and then going to University of Maryland. I mean, again, I became a minority on that campus, and even at the Honors College, I was a minority again. And even where I did my internships with Walter Reed Army Medical, and then with the energy company that I interned with so I was used to operating in mixed worlds. When I got to Seattle, what I wasn't used to was not operating around Black people at all. Right. Now, I was on probably 95% travel with my job. So I was rarely actually in Seattle, even though I moved there, and was paying $900 a month as a first year out of college graduate at a place I rarely saw. But that's neither here nor there. Another bad decision that I've learned from. But again, with finding that path, I was like, you know what? How would it be if I still worked for you in Seattle, but moved back home to DC because I'm going to travel anyway, Yeah, let's do that. So I tried to find people of color, and I'm not just saying Black people, just people of color. Seattle had a booming Asian population, and those folks became my folks. And they opened their arms to me. They let me hang around. They let me go to, family events. And so that was really nice. That was actually, even though I had friends in the DC area that were Asian that I grew up with. Anchan and Analoy were my two Asian friends in fifth grade, and I can't find them to this day. So if they happen to be listening to this podcast,
wouldn't that be
hit me
incredible?
up, Anchan. Hit me up, Analoy. I've been looking for you, girls.
If this episode can bring you back together with your friends, that'll be...
Listen. It was so worth it, right? Amazing. So yeah, so in Seattle, there just weren't. I found one Black friend, and she was just a little bit different. And so it was just a really interesting introduction to, oh, this country's not Wakanda for real.
Right.
And thus began, and I remember going to my boss, actually, Mari, a guy named Bruce, white guy, super, super nice, super pale, hadn't spent a lot of time around other people, people who were non-white. And I told him, he was asking me, because it was his job to find out, we moved you here. I actually chose you to come work for my organization. How are you doing? And it's one thing I don't know how to do is mince words. I can make them sound good, but I was like, yeah, so Bruce, where are the people of color? He was like, I was wondering if you were going to pick up on that. Yeah. And so we had, every time we met, that became a part of the conversation. And a part of what he was trying to do was connect me with other professionals in the area who were people of color. And so I appreciated him trying, but it just wasn't enough. And this is before DEI initiatives and, the racial earthquake of 2020 with corporations. And so he was just one of those good guys who tried, but it just wasn't enough. So my experience in Seattle was one of trying to find my people, being adopted by my Asian brothers and sisters, and really enjoying them, but also feeling like an outsider with them because they had inside jokes and terms and things that I wasn't aware of. That they weren't intentionally trying to make me feel left out. They were trying to welcome me in, but it still was a bridge to bridge that cultural gap.
Yeah. And having, it makes sense, like trying to find your way and trying to, I think that we all have those experiences where it's like, how do we start to adapt to where I am in this present moment, however I can make that happen. And you did that. But actually being in IBM, in tech, I imagine, not only in your specific company or location or I don't know how IBM works. I'm sure at that time they had lots of different locations, but what was that experience like being, I imagine, one of the only Black women in that industry and in that company, and and having, I imagine, the experience of having to travel to many different locations that where you are the only in those situations. Like how, obviously, like part of your progression, like you said, was that wasn't your first experience, right, in terms of how you were able to adapt, but just in terms of starting your professional career, how did you navigate that
for my development and ongoing success?
Yeah. Another important point, I think, in your sharing that is how impactful colorism is in community. Please believe. I mean, we could spend a whole hour on that alone. I know we can. and I was actually interestingly enough, I was having a conversation with my husband about this last night, but, and there are lots of ways that I think about it, talk about it in terms of the Latinx community, and every community has a way of, obviously, like there's kind of the broader umbrella of anti-Blackness, right? That so many different communities fall under in terms of how, the colorism shows up. Yeah. But, I think in the Black community, I know to your experience, as you were saying, it's, how you were treated, how you were seen, how you were viewed, how you were valued. So I know we could go deep into this, but I'll just
say this. So I think two things that really mattered to me around colorism. First, kind of picking up on the story with my family, that mattered on my dad's side of the family, to the point I still have a cousin to this day in her now 40s who brings that up, that, she's a little bit darker than me, and how she was treated, how she and I were treated by his family. So it's something that still bothers her to this day. Doesn't bother me to this day because, honey, I love the skin I'm in. My melanin is all that to me. I mean, seriously, I mean that. I really came into just loving, not just accepting, but loving it. Number two is when, I got to the age where boys became a thing, like a real thing in my kind of middle school years. My best friends were significantly lighter than me. One of them was probably your complexion, but she was actually Indian. Her parents were both from India. One of my girlfriends was both of her parents are African American, and the other girlfriend probably lighter than, I would say she's lighter than both, and both of her parents are actually African American. And so when we would go hang out at the movies and even into high school, they were always the ones that boys were talking to. The guys always wanted the light-skinned girl.
Right.
And it bothered me at first. Like I felt kind of low and bad, and then I would go home and my parents would, talk me through it. We'd laugh or whatever. And over time, I began to feel like, oh, well, if that's who they want, they can have that, and not that meaning my friends like in that way, but if that's what those guys are looking for, I'm not checking for them anyway. I don't ever want somebody who doesn't want me. And that was something that my parents helped me through, that don't want something that's not meant for you.
Yeah.
And so those things though, at first they were daggers. Yeah. It would hurt really, really bad that just again within my own African American community, within the boys that I liked, they had proclivities for light-skinned women with less kinky hair. And it is so funny to me that the man that I'm married to, when I think about the way that the Lord just created the perfect guy, who just loves every part of me. Yeah. When I say my kinky hair, my fat rolls, when I'm sick, when all the things, he really just loves the essence of me and everything that comes with it. Even when he's frustrated with me, and that was earlier today. He's like, I can't even be mad with you because I love you so much. And so I just tell other women especially, don't want the guy who doesn't want you, because there is going to be a guy out there, I promise you, who is going to love you well, who was raised well, and is going to love you well. And so, and it wasn't even like I kind of was waiting for that to happen. But at some point in my early 20s, I was like, these guys out here aren't even worth my time. It's kind of how I felt. And I was like, you know what? Jesus, I'm going to just marry you. Me and you. We're going to go to the movies, and I'm going to just sit here by myself and have dinner. And the Lord was just like, you poor helpless soul. I'm preparing him. Just chill. And so Derek is just, he's it for me. Yeah. There's nobody like him. Yeah.
Yeah. When you think about that, like, in terms of your journey of dating and, you know, trying to figure out your path around that, it seems as though there came a moment for you, a very intentional moment where it was like, I'm gonna wait and see what comes to me, and I know that the right person will present themselves. Does it feel like that was born, like you said, of this, like of having relationships or having encounters with men that were difficult, or feeling like, you know, I know and I think about my own journey, right? Like, for all of us who are trying to figure it out in their teenage years, I feel like these kids are out here and they're so much different than we were.
Yes.
So much different.
So much different.
And I mean that in I feel like they're much more savvy or educated, more attuned. And I feel like we were, you know, of a different generation where we were definitely out there trying to figure it out.
Certainly. Yeah. So it's interesting. I had two long-term boyfriends, one in college, one at the end of high school into college, one in college into graduation, and both, as I look back on them, I'm glad that I had the relationships, because it taught me so much about how men think more intimately than, because I have, again, my brother is a year older than me, and his friends were always around. So, I mean, boys were dumb to me. They were all my brothers, and they were also just kind of dumb. They just made dumb decisions that I'm like, really? Y'all went and did that? That's how y'all think? Okay. So I had multiple layers of engaging with young men, from the perspective of my brother. And I actually, in high school, early high school, and I don't think they were even close friends at the time, if I can remember right, a guy that became one of his really good buddies, and I dated in high school. And I was just like, this is how dating works, you know, in 10th grade. Okay. You mean I gotta call you every day and you gotta call me, and that's a lot of work. I want to hang out around my girlfriends and talk about stuff. So yeah, I mean, it was special to receive little teddy bears and mixtapes. You know, then you get those mixtapes, Mari. That was cool.
I got the mixtape. They could have their polo shirts and wear Drakkar.
Yes, that was they when they smelled good. That was good. That was nice. But you know, I don't know. I wasn't. I think this is a part of Derek saying I lived in Zaneta land. I just really, actually, this brings to mind when when we lived in our first house that we lived in from the time I was 2 until the time I was 10. I lived on the second, my room was on the second floor, and it was kind of like a brownstone, and we had this kind of little short roof that was right under my window. So many nights in Zaneta land, I would dream, literally, that there would be a guy on a white horse. was going to come riding down, and I lived on a hill. So riding down our hill, and he was going to somehow climb up onto the thing, and he was going to come profess his love for me. And he had flowers, like these beautiful red roses. And so that was like, that was young Zaneta's dream of her guy, that he was going to be super romantic. He was going to be heroic. He was going to be strong and poetic and all those things. And so the real thing, even in high school and college, kind of
you're like, does not match.
You not getting up on that horse, huh? Okay, the best I can do is, okay, at least you're driving a Lexus. We'll take that. But your lips are too dark because you've been smoking too much weed. So next. So we were a little particular. But yeah, I got to a point where I was just like, I have dated guys because of going all over the country and all these different cities. And they don't have their stuff together. So, I just had a really bad experience in college as well, with a guy who took advantage of me. And I was just like, I don't see it for myself. So I really think that I'm just going to be single. And I really believed that for the year and a half before Derek and I reconnected. I really believed that I was just going to be single for the rest of my life, because not that I thought I was so great. I just thought that they just weren't measuring up to what I had expected in a partner. And I was like, if I'm going to share my life with somebody, like all of me, I really need you to come bringing something to the table that's worth it. Otherwise, it's just not worth it. Like, I can just do this thing on my own. So that is kind of then the introduction to, and it's so funny that one of I developed a very close relationship with a guy at church who was a homosexual. And he and I were, peas in a pod, because I felt safe around him. I didn't feel like, because almost every guy that had been my friend up until that point, at some point tried to put the moves on, tried to go across the friendship line. And I didn't have to worry about that with him. And he was fun. Like, I could bring him to my parents' house if I wanted to. We could hang out in the bedroom, and I never had to worry about, gosh, is he looking at my leg, or when I walk away, or, just any of those things. He was just safe for me. And so that was, I was just like, it's just going to be me and him hanging out for the rest and I'm good with that. He's look, we go to movies, we go to dinner. He's a great partner. I love it. And so then, we're hanging out at my parents' house one day, and I'm 22, 23. And I get this postcard. He goes and gets the mail, and he brings it. My mom passes the mail to him for me. And there's this postcard. And on this postcard, there's a picture of the London Eye. And it's a postcard from London. And it's like, roses are red, violets are blue, something, something. And I'm thinking of you. Signed, Derek.
Wow.
And I was like, what? What? Oh my gosh. Huh. This has Knight on a White Horse potential.
Yes.
And so that just began that journey with Derek.
I love that. Yeah, I was going to say, that's such a beautiful, romantic part of you that that was always present, and then you found your guy on the white horse.
I did.
I want to see Derek on a white horse. We're gonna have to make this.
Me too. You know what? We didn't get our family pictures done that we always do for our Christmas photos, so that might be a way that we make that up.
I'll tell you what. If you make that happen, that'll make the rest of my year.
It's coming. Challenge accepted. I don't back down from a challenge.
I know you don't. Yeah, it's going back to like I said, you were making this transition to Arrow when we met. Yeah. So some right around that time. And, I know for you, your time in Arrow, there was like such a, trajectory upward in terms of your, where you were headed, your position in that company. And, it was relentless in terms of the work, the way that I experienced it in relationship to you. But I would love to just hear more about that time of life, because I know there were, transitions and, and then again to where you've landed now, which I think is probably a culmination of all of those experiences. But I'd love to just talk about that time and period for you.
Yeah, Arrow came to me out of the blue, to be honest with you. There were a lot of things that I had planned for. Arrow was one of the things that I had not anticipated or planned for. I'd been working at a startup in Colorado, a tech startup, and I was trying out different ways to think about, and I was leading marketing, and I was thinking of ways to engage our clients and our perspectives with Internet of Things, which is a type of technology. And Arrow heard about what I was doing and invited me in for a meeting. I thought the initial meeting that I was talking to them about was the work that I was doing and how my company that I was with would then go on to become a contractor or a vendor for some of their services. Well, that meeting turned into, we heard about you and what you were doing. And when I tell you it was out of a movie, I mean, some of the things in my life, it's just so funny how poetic they are.
Yeah.
A little piece of paper was slid across the table to me and said, here's a number that we're thinking about to bring you on to help lead our Internet of Things marketing globally. And I was like, I'm sorry.
Excuse me.
Excuse me. This isn't what I thought. Oh, this is me and you. Yeah, can I take a moment and get back to you? And so that became, and then a lot of prayer. I mean, I remember walking these streets in my neighborhood, and I know people must have thought I was crazy. I was praying out loud, having a conversation with the Lord on several walks that weekend about, is this from you? Because if this is not from you, I don't want any parts of it. That number is big and that would be great. But if that's not from you, then it's going to come with a whole bunch of stuff that I'm not prepared for, and I don't want to bring into my life or my family's life. And so my kids were still young then, and also we moved to Colorado with my thinking to start a church. And that's what we were here for. Right. And whatever else I was doing on the side was just in support of what Derek had done, which is so funny because now that I look back, so many of the people in my life, even my father, were a little bit concerned that I was pushing pause on me to help do what my husband was purposed to do, that I was going to help him with. And you hear all that story about me up until this point, and I just kind of said, you know what? Pause. I'm doing my kids and I'm doing this church thing. And everybody was like, what? What has happened? Is she okay? She's not the same. And so when I got back, when I started with this company, the smaller company, people felt a little more comfortable that I was still moving along a path. And so it was kind of interesting because during those years that I wasn't springboarding like I had been in my career, I was watching my friends springboard. Some of the ones that I grew up with had graduated from law school and graduated from medical school and were getting into their careers and being recognized and doing all these wonderful things in their career. And here I was just at home with my kids and had started my own consultancy on the side, but it was primarily so I could support being at home with my kids and work kind of on the side. So when I got to the opportunity for Arrow, I wanted to make sure it was right for me and my family. And when, after my talks with Jesus and talking to Derek, we said, you know what? we think this is right. Like, let's go for it. And so the second day I was there, I was asked to present to the CEO of this, fortune. Now Arrow's 30 billion in revenue plus. And I go into the CEO suite and everyone's sitting around the table. And my presentation was just a part of a larger one. I only had a little bit to say, but there was this list of companies that I was doing I had done a quick competitive survey of, and presented to him and said, Arrow could be listed at the top of this list in Internet of Things if we do these kind of 3 things. And he kind of, why the hell would we want to be listed as the top of these companies when that's not our brand? And I thought you were in marketing and understood that. And I was like, what? I'm sorry. Maybe I misunderstood the assignment. And so after the meeting, the couple of people who had brought me into the meeting to talk with him were like, are you okay? And you're okay? I was like, oh yeah, I'm fine. Because I didn't have any skin in the game, right? Like, I'm new. It wasn't like I had, known this and I should have known or whatever. And so I think to them, where they thought I should be shook because the CEO kind of fired me up on my first pass with him, I was just like, that's the nature of how things work. Like, he has a particular way that he sees the brand and he wants things to go. And either it's up to me to learn that and present under the auspices of that, or to change his mind.
Yeah.
But this is my second day. I'm not going to run away and be ashamed. And I think that earned me a lot of credit with a lot of people very early on. And so, it was then doing what I had done before, which was making connections with, it's a massive organization. Yeah. It's global, and making these connections with all of these primarily male leaders around the company to bring them together to come up with a vision for how we were going to bring this thing to market. Yeah. And I was relentless in making sure that, because that was my assignment, that we were able to do that. Yeah. And we were able to do that. And we accomplished that within the first 18 months. Wow. It was not easy. Mm-hmm. I had to sacrifice a lot of time at home, a lot of time with friends, family. But I knew what I was going into. Now, were things, it was the most, it was the place that I experienced the most shaking of my identity in my adult life. And part of that was, I was just around a lot of really powerful people. Yeah. People who a lot of people reported up into, a lot of people who had a lot of money, who had a lot of status. And I began to want those things that those people had. Because I naturally, I like nice things. Yeah. And so I began to see myself really pushing for making sure that I could keep my job because I liked the money, making sure that I could show up for my annual review as well as I could because there was bonus money attached to it, making sure that, my team was presenting at a certain level so that people would see that as a reflection of me. And I began to lose my identity. And it became an Arrow identity. Even the way I began to talk at home, Derek would say, you say align a lot. Are we aligned? And I thought, who am I becoming? That was the first time in my adult life that I began to be absorbed by something. And I wasn't used to that. I was used to going in spaces and being a change maker versus going into spaces and being changed. And it just got to a point to where I was like, this isn't who I am. And, the first couple of years when I was at Arrow, people would tell me how different I was and how they were so happy I was there because I was making an impact and because I was changing the game. And the last kind of year, I began to look and see those comments aren't being shared with me like that anymore.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, comments about, hey, your team isn't happy with this, or, this, the higher ups are, you got to choose sides. Which person are you, and it just became kind of a place I did not want to be. And it was the first time in a while, because I was there for almost 5 years, that I had to decide for myself, like, am I able to make change here?
Yeah.
Or am I going to be changed? And when I realized it was going to be the latter, if I stayed, I had to get out of there.
Yeah.
And so I had to make a really hard decision because we had just bought this new house and we had just, made some decisions. And, for my own mental health, for my sanity, for my family's sake, because I also was traveling globally at least once a quarter for a week and a half at a time. That's a lot of time away from young children. And I missed them. I missed my church. I missed my husband. And I just wasn't available like I was before. And so we made the hard decision that, you know what, we got to change some things and we got to go. So, so it happened. It just all came together where I was able to leave well.
Wow. Zaneta, yeah. And talk more about what you're doing right now, because I feel like it's, as you talk about like being the change, I think that so succinctly defines what you're trying to do right now.
Yeah, when I first moved to Colorado, about 2 years after we moved here, and I started working for that startup, I began to attend Colorado Technology Association events, and because I'm a techie, and I was like, oh, these are my people. And it was like going to that college lab with electrical engineering students, and all of them were white males. And, I went to the leader at the time and I said, hey, where are the people of color in tech? It was like, well, they don't exist in Colorado. It was just a very matter-of-fact statement. And I believed him because I didn't know Colorado. I was still new. And heck, I lived in Park Hill. And based on what I saw, he must have been right. And so I just kind of put that in the back of my mind. And then working at Arrow, I was on a global team. So I wasn't much into the local scene. And so it took a while for me to understand that Colorado has a problem in tech. And fast forward to my last year at Arrow, I did the Colorado Governor's Fellowship Program. And as a result of doing that program, we're asked to serve in different capacities. And one of the capacities I signed up for or interviewed for was the Bell Commission. So I became a state commissioner. And as a result of being a state commissioner, when the pandemic hit Colorado, the governor's office asked commissioners in the state to extend our expertise into multiple different areas. One of those areas was to help small businesses. And so I joined Energize Colorado and began to help on a couple of different initiatives. When I was in the BIPOC initiative, a guy named Kevin Allen, who is a black guy from the DC area as well, he and his family moved here a few years back, for him to push forward one of his tech companies. He is has had two successful tech exits. And has been on The Apprentice, the second season. And so he and I got to know each other, and he was like, so Z, where are the people of color in tech? And it was almost like a 10-year whiplash to that conversation I had with the leader of the Colorado Technology Association. And so I told him, I was like, good question. I don't know how to answer that for you. And I explained the journey I had been on, and I said, you know what? Now's the time. I got a little extra time on my hands. Now's the time to figure out where are the people of color in tech in Colorado, and are they being supported? And as we went on this kind of listening tour and listened and tried to uncover and find our tech entrepreneurs in Colorado who are people of color, Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and Asian, we just were not able to find good stories of, hey, I am a person of color in tech and I've had the best experience here in the state. Quite frankly, it was the opposite. Everybody, every single one of them had a story of, I don't have the support network. I haven't had the proper education. I haven't been admitted into accelerator. And these were some of the things. So I said, let's build it. And so we got Brad Feld on board, who is kind of Mr., Startup Tech Colorado and beyond, globally. And we started interviewing other accelerators around the country and found one called Div Inc., Diversity Inc. They're a nonprofit based in Austin, Texas, founded by Preston James, who's their CEO. And we looked at their model and said, what you're doing in Austin, we want to do here in Denver. And so now I've been working on helping to bring Div Inc. to Colorado, along with my own marketing consulting that I do under Delightsum. So those two initiatives are what I'm working on, but really working hard to bring an accelerator to Colorado that is going to help build and scale tech businesses for founders of color.
I love it. I love it.
Thanks.
Yeah. So, this podcast is about BIPOC women who are overcoming trauma and becoming resilient. And I would love to know what resilience means to you.
I feel like that question is so funny, Mari, because if you remember at the elementary school that our kids went to, they had characteristics of the blue bear.
Yeah. Tenacity.
Exact. Don't go any beyond that word. That's the one that comes to mind. That's the one, I'm always able to quickly pull up. But heck, that's what resilience is to me. It is tenacity. It is not giving up. It is sticking to it. It is hanging in there. It is pushing through, having perseverance, and that perseverance is going to have its full impact and bring about brilliance. And so that's what resilience means to me.
I love that. And I feel like that so embodies who you are, that definition. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I you know what? Make sure Derek puts that on my tombstone.
Along with a picture of him on a white horse.
I might make him go shirtless on that one.
He better be going to the gym.
Oh, he has been. Yeah, he's been at BBP, so he's looking good.
I know. You're like, now's the time.
Now's the time.
Well, thank you so much, Zaneta. This was so wonderful. And I feel like, although I know you, I got to know some very intimate parts of your life and put some pieces together for me. So thank you so much for being so open and being willing to be here.
It is my pleasure. If there's any part of my story that can bring about change, hope, or any type of joy to anyone else, it is my pleasure to tell it.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to come back and we're going to go deeper into some of those topics that we weren't able to. So.
Sounds good.
Just gonna get it out. It ain't even mine to hold, man. Tech ready. Tap that.